Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the chief underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now, here's your host, Dr. W.F. Strong.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Good Books Radio. I'm your guest host today, Dr. W.F. Strong, sitting in for Dr. John Cook, who is on vacation in Cuernavaca, Mexico, having a great time, I'm sure. But since he asked me to sit in, I got to choose my own book. So I chose this book called Hunting Charles Manson by Lise Wheel. Now, Lise Wheel, you will know the name because she was a legal analyst on Fox News for 15 years. And she was often sparring with Bill O'Reilly. You will remember her for that. But she's written this wonderful book in a new series that she calls the Hunting Series. And it is a splendid investigation of this psychopathic, strangely, celebrity who has dominated the crime news in one way or another, it seems, for the past 40, 50 years. So she's on the phone. Let's talk to her now. Charles died about the time you were in the middle of this, right?
Well, not really the middle. I was the core. All the texts had been written about this book. I mean, I actually researched and worked on this book for about 2 years, 2+ years. So Manson had the good grace to die after the book was all written. And I say good grace. I mean, I wouldn't normally talk about the dead like this, but, I don't really feel so much of a compunction to be not kind to Charles Manson.
I don't think you need to.
No, I don't need to be. So when I say good grace to die, it's like, he didn't do anything good for anybody while he was alive. So, so I have a chapter in here that talks about it's titled, I'm dying, right? Because he was always running to the hospital with one thing or the other. So I was running to the printer with one thing or the other when he was on this last chapter, because I had to change the chapter from dying to dead, and then also what was happening with his estate. Because wouldn't you know it, when he died, there were all these things that are actually still ongoing about his estate. But before his estate, his body, who would have rights to his body, who would be able to bury his body, right? And so right to the very end of the publishing of it, I was right there, and the publisher was a little bit, kids are bad. Not really. They were very kind. I have a wonderful publisher. But really, we were tweaking that last chapter. My fingers were going, going to get that ink on him. They're tweaking that because I wanted to get the legalities right.
Right.
Me being the legal analyst,
sure,
absolutely right as to who would get the rights to the body, and the judge gave it to Jason Freeman, Mason's grandson, excuse me, who, by the way, I got pretty much exclusive material from, talked with him along the way. Now, you'll see if you look him up, he's given tons of interviews post Manson's death.
Right.
He's kind of became a media phenomenon post Manson's death. I think kind of to get money, frankly, because Manson's worth more dead than alive.
Oh, yes.
But I got to him. I got to the grandson way before Manson died, and before, frankly, I think the grandson knew that he was going to make some money off of this. So got some kind of interesting takes on him.
Well, it's interesting how this insane man, this truly insane criminal, has such staying power after he's gone, even to where his grandson's made a star.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons that I chose Manson as a topic, because when I was talking with the publisher and coming up with this idea of a series, because Hunting is a series, and Charles Manson is the first topic in the series, we decided on Manson as our first topic in part because of that cultural staying power. And let me just give you an example. When I told my son, who was 23 at the time, now 25, I was focusing on Manson. He said, now this is a 23-year-old talking, "Oh, Mom, are you sure that's safe? Now, a 23-year-old, right? Okay, so clearly, not alive when in 1969, the summer of 1969, when Manson did all these terrible things. But he knew enough to know that Manson was scary and horrible and awful. First of all, what a sweet thing. I mean, my son is so sweet and such a good human being.
Concerned about your safety, of course.
Yes, concerned about my safety and how wonderful, what a sweet young man he is. But more than that, the transcendence of a cultural phenomena that's so relevant with millennials told me, oh my gosh, I have picked the right topic because of that staying power. And when I got really into the topic, I realized even more. When, for example, just months ago, this Keith Rainier, and this horrible cult that has been revealed. Keith Rainier,
yes.
And the Smallville actress, what's her name? Allison Mack is also going to be tried for the sex cult and this horrible thing that they've been doing, branding young women, all of this stuff. You realize again, oh my gosh, the Manson playbook is alive and well. Alive and well.
Well, see, that's one of the things
to me, you got to write about history lest it repeat itself.
That's one of the things that stood out for me in your early chapters is I didn't realize he was cultivating, pardon the pun, the cult.
Yes.
So early. I didn't realize he was collecting, young women from around, California and building them into a cult, and early on started restricting their access to relatives and sequestering them, in a sense, on this ranch. But I want to ask you about that ranch. How did he have permission to be on that ranch?
Well, the owner of Spawn Ranch, is referring to Spawn Ranch there in the outskirts of the LA area. In fact, I went there, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. Was owned by a guy who had horses on the ranch, and he made his money by sort of renting out the horses to tourists who would come through and want rides, and stuff like that. And so Manson and the girls, the family, would take care of the livestock. They would muck out the stalls. They'd take care of the livestock. They'd make sure everything was clean and all that stuff. And so the owner of the ranch, for a while, is an elder gentleman, sort of liked having these young, pretty girls around, liked Manson, and cleaning, providing all these young women to clean out the stalls, to make everything nice, keep the ranch going, that sort of thing. And there were some implications that Squeaky Fromm, one of the girls there, might have been doing more than cleaning out the stalls for this rancher.
Sure.
Right, exactly. There were those implications. So for a while, it was that kind of hippie love, everything's,
kind of a commune.
60s commune, everything's groovy. Would smoke a little, weed and all that kind of stuff. And there was more drugs than just it was a lot more than just marijuana. There were LSDs, a lot of other stuff going on. But for a while, it was, from the outside looking in, oh, this is just a groovy peace love. What could possibly go wrong with that? Until it turned much darker. And, the whole Helter Skelter phenomena came about in Manson's mind, that he was going to create, a race war, and that the only, person that could save L.A. and beyond was Manson and his family, and it turned dark. But from the beginning, there was this peace, love, everything's great. We're going to clean out the stalls, and for rich people that wanted to ride these horses.
Well, do you think that's where he first realized the power that was right under the surface for him to grab if he wanted to?
I think, he studied sort of cultism and all of, not cultism, but he studied leaders like that in prison. And plus he was he played the guitar, he sang, he was, decent magician, not magician, Freudian slip for me.
Yeah, right.
Musician, I should say, right.
A little both, evidently.
He would strum the guitar, he sang, some said, well, if the Beach Boys had just given him a contract and he'd made it as a guitarist and all that, a singer, then none of this would happen. I don't believe that. I think he would have, done horrible things no matter what. But that's what he was trying to get. He was trying to move to L.A., make it in the music industry. Mind you, he was on parole for other felonies.
Mm-hmm.
He was in the prison system for a long time, way before he started gathering up these girls. If the parole officers had done their job, maybe a lot of this stuff wouldn't happen. But if and if and if.
Well, it certainly fits the profile of a cult in the sense that you get you get isolation, you get a charismatic leader, you get people that are down and out themselves and need someone to look to for leadership and validation. And so he worked all those psychology simultaneously.
Yes. Let me tell you. So in October of 2016. I went to the last parole hearing that Tex Watson has had. Tex Watson, as you probably know, is the man that actually wielded the knife and did the physical murders. I mean, Manson put everything in place. Tex Watson carried out the wishes and had the girls with him in those nights and, actually stabbed Sharon Tate and the others. I was the only press person that was allowed there. I was the only press person that got access to that hearing. Sat as close to Tex Watson as 3 feet away. There was nobody in between us. Yeah, I was there. Took pictures of him. Took pictures of the victims families who were there. Sat with them, Deborah Tate and the others. And it was really that. And I'd already started working, on writing and the book. But that was really it. I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to do this. I've got to write this book. But sitting there and listening to him, and when it came to the parole officer saying, what made a God-fearing young man like you move from Texas, you going to church every Sunday and, raised by good parents, move from Texas and move to California and commit the worst crimes the state has ever seen. And he looked at the parole officer, and this was just mind-boggling. I fell off my seat. He just said, Charlie gave us love and acceptance. No. Yeah, why couldn't he be a good guy, a Christian boy, And I just, this man now is 70 years old, and he's still saying this stuff, and I'm just like, oh my God. Oh my gosh. Incredible. So it's exactly what you were just saying, that Charles Manson, for all of his craziness, he knew that. He tapped into that. He saw that in others. Like, he could give them this love and acceptance that somehow they didn't feel in the outside world. And they would do anything for him. They saw him as Jesus Christ. They saw him as the guru. They saw him as God.
Well, they say he looked a bit like Jesus, right, in the early days?
In the early days, yeah. And if you look at the cover of Hunting Charles Manson, the book, the photo that the art department picked, and the way that he's looking up, I'm staring at it right now, speaking with you, the way that he's looking up is sort of a Jesus Christ sort of photo-ish look.
Yeah, I thought that when I saw it.
I got to turn it over. It's like staring. Okay, I'm turning it over. Oops, there's a picture of me on the other side. Oops. Okay, I'm walking away. It's a little scary.
Well, the murder I didn't know about was the Gary Hinman murder. I didn't, know that there was a kind of dress rehearsal in a sense for the Sharon Tate thing. That was really particularly frightening to me because this was the others certainly frightening, but this one rather bizarre because he was a guy that Manson knew, came into an inheritance, and he said, well, I should have some of that. I should have some of that money.
Gary Hinman was just a local guy. Came into an inheritance of about $20,000, Manson thought. Now, in reality, there was no money there at the house when they went, and actually Manson chopped off one of his ears, and still Gary Hinman said, I don't have it here, take my cars, here's the title to my old beat-up cars, and Manson said, well, you're taking this fancy trip, and Hinman said, well, I'm not, my parents are paying for this, I don't have any money. And they tortured him for several days, and he finally died. Now, one of the sweetest things, it's kind of weird to say in Manson, but that's come out of my writing this book is meeting Kay Martley, the cousin of Gary Hinman. Kay and I have become actually friends. through, Kay and many of these victims' families have traveled from one parole hearing to another. And Kay lives, Kay lives in the west, and she's just a lovely woman. And I spoke with her so often about Gary, and she said, "Please write about Gary, and please write about, please write honestly about Gary, and he hasn't been written about because he's not famous like Sharon Tate, but." Write about him and write honestly about him. And so I wrote a chapter that was, I think, respectful of the Gary Hinman, because people have, what has been written about him has been, I think, like he was a drug guy, and he wasn't. He really wasn't, from my research. And I talked a long time with Gary. Gary's mother's heart broke really over his death. And she died shortly after.
My heart broke just reading it.
Sad.
I mean, really,
sad.
You certainly did your job.
Thank you. Yeah, and well, thank you. And Kay saw the book and saw the chapter and was happy, and that made me happy.
But it also, at the same time, showed the kind of incredible early depravity that Manson was slipping into. If we call it slipping, he may have already been there. But I mean, to take a guy that you knew and say, "Well, you won't share your money, so I'll kill you." I mean, just.
Yeah, and in a horrible, long, it took days.
Yes, a torture, but just
right,
really.
In his own home. Yeah, it was just horrible. They didn't need to. He'd given them everything, and they were his friends. They were friends. Supposedly.
Now put on your lawyer hat, and a lot of people say, well, Charles Manson didn't do these murders himself, so he got. Unfair punishment. What do you say?
Oh, well, that's ridiculous because of the laws of conspiracy. Now, back in the day, in 1969, Vincent Bugliosi, who was a prosecutor, did have, it wasn't the easiest of cases because of what you just said, that Manson wasn't, not only did he not, wield the knife, as Tex Watson did that, but he wasn't even there at the crime scenes.
Right.
So now we have RICO, we have all these different laws for conspiracy. We go, just give him a RICO statute, criminal conspiracy, criminal enterprise that he was running out there in that cult. But RICO didn't exist. So all of these things didn't exist. So Bugliosi had to prove that because Manson set things in motion with, do something witchy, the magic words that he used, and showing Tex Watson how to use the knife, and doing all of this, and driving him to the places, and all of this stuff, and telling him what to do, setting them into motion, that he was as criminally liable as if he'd been there. And that was an uphill battle in the sense that it was pre-Manson, it hadn't been used like that. Now it's not a big deal to use it, but you have to understand, conspiracy law is such that if you do set things in motion, and you are the one that puts it together, and you set it all in motion, and it does happen that way, that people go and act on what you have set in motion, you're as criminally liable as if you've done it yourself. You take those substantial steps to do it. And in the second murder, after the Tate murders, the LaBianca murders the next day, Manson drove around with them and found the spot and said, yeah, do it there. That's where you should go. That's the next place to go.
And was it the Manson trial that that put those laws into effect, so to speak? That created them?
Conspiracy law, the conspiracy law had been in effect.
Well, let me go to your son's warning, so to speak, or worry.
Yeah.
Since you've published the book, it hasn't been out too long, but is there any truth to it? Is there any, Manson cabal out there in social media that has written to you or taken you to task in any way?
There's some people out there that, not really taken to task, but there's some people out there that don't believe that Manson is guilty, that don't believe that he should have been in prison, certainly for as long as he was, certainly that he was guilty for, anything really. I mean, there's some people that don't believe he should have been in prison at all, that certainly are true believers of Manson, or some people that believed if he'd been should have been in prison, but certainly not for as long as he was. I mean, there's some, absolute followers of Manson that were, when he was in prison, they were followers of Manson. Absolutely. And there are alternative theories. I have a whole chapter, actually, in the book about alternative theories.
Mm-hmm.
So I tried to be very fair. I mean, I think I was very fair. But, not really dangerous like my son was worried about. I think more that he just hears Manson, and it's a very frightening thing. Because of what Manson and the family did. But sure, even now, there are so many believers of Manson. I mean, I start the book with, Manson had somebody that, wanted to marry him. And
I know.
woman who was,
tell me about that. How does that happen? I mean,
unbelievable. Well, a woman named Star, who was,
I read
her very, very young. Who wanted to name Star Manson and went ahead and got a marriage license. Now,
and she got the tattoo on the forehead.
Got the tattoo on the forehead. Did the whole shamir.
And her father was so proud.
I'm sure her father was proud on Father's Day. I mean, I don't understand the mentality, and that's where I kind of take a step back and say, look, I'm not a psychologist. I don't understand these things. I don't write from a psychologist's point of view because I'm a legal analyst. I don't understand that. I can't opine on that. I just write it. I don't know it.
Yes.
But it's there, and somehow he taps into that. I don't get it. So I can't tell you why, but it's there, and it's still there. And look again, Keith Rainier. It's still there, And my point on that is that unless you think it's just like topless dancers or prostitutes or something like that, it's not just runaway kids from bad families, whatever you define that to be. Mm-hmm. It's fancy kids from fancy families too. It's everybody's susceptible, or a lot of kids are susceptible.
Right.
So it's
Or is it just fun to?
I don't know.
Hug
your kid.
Yeah. Well, Star, she moved to be close to the prison, to be close to him, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's. But this is not uncommon for serial killer types. They often get groupies. Oh,
they get groupies. I mean, I when I reported, I was at Fox for 15 years, and when I reported on some of them, I was on Scott Peterson I followed that case from beginning to end, and even when he got the death penalty, there were women writing him, wanting to, marry him. I was like, well, at least you know where he's going to be. Your guy's not out and about. I guess that's the benefit. But I'm like, I have to bow out because I'm not a psychologist. Yeah. But because I just don't get it. It's like, that one's beyond me.
Well, there's something I never have been able to figure out is the kind of rather universal, it seems, curiosity about the most insane and violent and, shall we say, successful of these sorts of killers. There was a guy who came to campus who specialized in serial killers, and he was going to give a lecture, about serial killers. And he did it in an auditorium, had 300 seats. Well, they filled it, and they said, okay, well, there's standing room only, so we'll do another one at 2 o'clock. He ended up doing 3 lectures that day because there were so many people who wanted to come hear about serial killers. It's just astonishing to me. I mean, of course, I was there too, so I can't say it's these other sicko people. But I just find it fascinating that there's so many people fascinated with this kind of psychological extremity and evil genius, if we call it that.
Well, we want to know what makes people, tick, I guess. And
how did they get that way?
With Manson, With Manson, I was also interested in again, why these people, why these women would follow him and stay, and I wanted to explore it and write about it and make history new, because we have to, again, like for the millennials, this is historical. This is an historical thriller, and I write it as a thriller.
Yes.
But I want kids to, I want people to read it because, emphasis on history. Okay, so you read it and go, don't let this happen to your kids, and don't let it happen to you. But write it as, again, history, so you realize, hey, this happens, and this is a thriller, but it happened in real life. So this can happen to anybody. Anybody that's feeling lost or abandoned and can find sort of this. I mean, looking at this Tex Watson character, if you passed him on the street, you go, nice-looking 70-year-old, takes care of himself, walked and talked just fine, until you realize he's murdered 7, more people in cold blood. Absolutely.
I was talking to a researcher, well, actually the guy that came here to lecture, he'd written a book on serial killers, and I was talking to him, and he was talking about how he went to see John Wayne Gacy at the prison, and when he was coming out, he ran into the woman who used to be his neighbor. She lived next door to him, and she was coming to see him, and he asked her, he said, why are you coming to see this man, who's one of the greatest killers in history? And she said, well, I didn't know him as that. He was just a really good neighbor, so very odd the way, people respond to it. All I knew was the good neighbor. So very, very strange.
He could be different characters, I guess.
Yes,
absolutely.
Yes. Well, many of them were.
But Manson had a horrible childhood, a mother who was, really not a very good mother at all. And he was in prison, really from a very young age. And that's the thing. Again, the system let us down because these parole officers were not doing their job. Had they been doing their job and watching him and having him check in, who knows what would have happened.
Well, Manson is a great subject to launch your series, the hunting series. What other books do you have or subjects are in mind?
I am already writing the second one, but so I have the topic, and I'm working hard on it. I'm very, very excited about the second topic. It was like when I thought of it, it was like, of course. Oh my gosh, why hasn't? Oh my gosh, this is like if Manson is relevant to today's society, my next topic is uber relevant. I mean, absolutely relevant, like 100 million times relevant. But
so you're not going to tell me?
Would mean I'd have to. Yeah, I'd have to send arsenic to you, and then I would be breaking the law, and then it would be ugly, and you have to go to the law, and have to go to prison, and it would be taking time away from my writing.
I could write your story
if
I were still alive.
Yeah, exactly. Well, then you wouldn't be allowed to tell it, and then that would be a whole other topic, and then I have to go to Texas and stand trial, and so let's just avoid that. Let me just write it, and then I'll be on your show again.
Well, this book on Manson, this is like your 16th book or somewhere like that?
18th, but 18th. You're keeping good count. Yeah.
Well, that's great. That's a lot of books. You must have a whole section in Barnes & Noble, just the least wheel section.
Would you just please tell them that? I mean, just tell them that that's what they need to do. I mean, come on, just get it done. Okay,
I will do it. I'm sure I have great pull.
Get that done. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on today and talking about Manson. It's been very illuminating. And you taught me a lot I didn't know. I mean, I grew up in an age where I was very aware of him, of course, and his Beatles connection.
Right.
So I've been very much aware of him and followed his trials a little bit, his various hearings over the years to see if they're going to let him out. But you taught me a great deal that I didn't know, and that's what a good book should do, is to give you new information and to explain it in a way that's, like you say, a compelling read. It is a good narrative that you have put together and pulls you right along. So thank you for a wonderful book, and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. Thank you for a great discussion. I appreciate it. And good luck with your book about Texas.
All right.
I love it.
Thank you. We've been talking to Lise Wheel about her new book, Hunting Charles Manson. I highly recommend it, but I don't recommend that you read it at night. It will sometimes freak you out. For Good Books Radio, I'm Dr. W.F. Strong signing off. Here's hoping that all your books are good reads.